Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. My name is Alex Jorgensen, and I'm the Communications Director here at the Alaska AFL-CIO. For this week on Labor Live, we are focusing back in on issues happening in the Alaska Legislature. I think they're kicking off the 12th week, and my guest can correct me if I'm wrong. I think we're in the 12th week. The session is blazing by, and so many important issues are happening. And this week's issue is wage theft. An issue that I think you may be surprised to know is far more prevalent in our world than you might think. So without further ado, I am so excited to have Representative Andrew Gray. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so wage theft. I've always kind of heard a little bit about that. It's pretty prevalent within the U.S. kind of writ large. But what is wage theft and how prevalent is it?
Well, wage theft is whenever an employer does not pay their employee the agreed upon wages or doesn't pay overtime that's required by law, or misclassifies the worker as an independent contractor in order to avoid paying certain fees, taxes, etc. Before that, I'll just say a little bit about myself. So I am the representative for the UMed district in Anchorage. I was first elected in 2022. Prior to that, I was a physician assistant at the Alaska VA and in the Alaska Army National Guard, with whom I deployed. And I ran for office mainly because I was interested in housing issues. Mayor Dave Bronson at the time had got me involved in politics because he was going to put a 1,000 person homeless shelter shortly, not too far away from the house that my family had just purchased. And so that got me to paying attention. Housing's still a big issue, but workers' rights is definitely something that I'm very interested in and very concerned about. And to get back to your question about how prevalent it is, we had our introductory hearing of wage theft in judiciary last week. We heard from 6 different folks, and predominantly from the construction industry. And really, the testimony was overwhelming. That if you worked in the construction industry long enough, you would be a victim of wage theft. I mean, that was essentially what the testimony was saying, that this is so pervasive and so common. I think the way it was kind of described was that construction in Alaska is expensive, and there are certain things that you can't, that a construction company can't change. They can't change the price of the land. They can't change the price of the materials. They can't change the municipal codes, the building codes, the zoning, things that could drive up the price. The one place where they have control over is how much they're paying their workers. And anything that they can do to reduce that cost, they're going to do. And we heard from former Representative Jesse Sumner talk about how unfair it is for him to try to be fair, pay the prevailing wage, do all the things that he's supposed to do, but yet he's competing against construction companies that are willing to misclassify their workers, not pay them for overtime, pay them less than they should be paying first and foremost, or agree to a price and then not pay them that price. And all of those things are happening. And that's what he's having to compete with. And he can't compete because he can't make up the difference in these other fixed cost aspects of the construction industry.
So it's almost like there's a little bit of like a race to the bottom, that because there's no one, or I mean, obviously there's the Department of Labor, but because there's no real strong controls and protections for these workers, everyone just kind of realizes it's almost baked into the system of cheating workers on their wages and benefits to some degree. Like that's just like the cost of business, so to speak.
So the enforcement mechanism is an important aspect. And the bottom line is that are these people breaking the law by not paying their workers the agreed upon rate, not paying for overtime, misclassifying them? Yes. And the Department of Labor would be the agency that you would report those violations to and who would hopefully enforce it. I got interested specifically in this aspect of the law last year, looking at seasonal workers. And what I'd heard from a couple of seasonal workers about abuses that were happening in their industry. Things such as someone in the lower 48 accepting a job in Alaska to work at a remote tourist destination, for example, where you'd be like flown out, and these workers were staying in sort of substandard housing in the middle of nowhere, but having a pretty sizable amount of their check deducted for the night that they were spending in this substandard housing. And labor law has very specific criteria for how you can deduct for housing. And clearly that, there were violations happening.
Right.
So that's kind of like, that was sort of my in where I started looking at it. And at the time, I have a podcast. I interviewed the head of Wage and Hour for the Department of Labor. And, publicly they say, please call us, please report. If you're somebody who's been denied pay that you believe you're rightfully entitled to, call our number. We will get that money back for you. But Department of Labor testified in our hearing, and what we see is a drastic decrease in the number of complaints that have been happening year after year. And I think perhaps some folks would say, well, maybe there's less violations happening. Clearly, for the invited testimony that we heard, these violations are happening every day. Why aren't they reporting? I'll tell you why. A, it's difficult to do that report. It's if you try to find their phone number on their website, it's multiple clicks. I think one of our committee members, Ted Eichscheid, attempted to get to the phone number, and he said it was 6 clicks on his phone to get to the page that had their phone number. That if you do make the complaint, it's an 8-page document that has to be filled out. It has to be filled out by the person who was violated. So in other words, you couldn't get a representative to fill that, someone else to fill that complaint out for you, which is problematic for folks who are on the job. If they're currently on the job, if you take time out of your work day to fill out this complaint or make the complaint, because the hours to call Department of Labor are in traditional working hours. They're not after hours numbers that are going to be answered. So if you have to work during the day, you're taking time away to make that call, and who knows how long you'll be on hold. And anyway, the longest story in the world longer is that we know that these complaints are not being effectively investigated, that there are not real consequences coming to folks who are violating our workers every single day. So the goal of what we've added into an existing bill that is Zach Fields, who represents downtown, his bill is to make wage theft a crime. Yes. And hopefully the real threat of a criminal investigation, potential jail time, would be a bigger threat to employers. So much so that we want them to start doing the right thing. This isn't necessarily a bill where we're hoping to lock a bunch of people up. It's that we want this publicized. We want employers to know that the crimes that they have been committing is not going to be tolerated anymore, and that they must pay their workers fairly. They must pay what they agree to pay. They must follow our overtime laws, and they cannot, and this is a big one because this happens a lot. I think you know this. Being misclassified as an independent contractor when you are not working anywhere else. This is the only employer that you're working for. You are showing up at the hours that they dictate, following the instructions that they dictate. For all intents and purposes, you are not an independent contractor. You are an employee of a single employer. And that misclassification of an independent contractor is rampant.
Is far too often of a problem. And kind of maybe diving in a little bit to the specifics. So what type of, crime is this adding for wage theft?
Hey, is my staff online? Is Nate Graham online?
I don't think so. But basically, it's kind of elevating it from like a civil violation that DOL handles to criminal violation. So
I don't want to state it wrong about how many violations you have to get certain penalties. So let me have Nate come in. And he can answer that. In the meantime, I will explain how big of a deal wage theft is in Alaska and in our country. In our country, $50 billion a year is lost to wage theft.
50 billion.
50 billion with
that
a
is
B.
Huge.
Well, it is. It's more if you total up the total amount of losses for motor vehicle theft, for robbery, for burglary, add all of that together, it is a much smaller number than 50 billion. So we have lots of folks out in the world who say that they want to be tougher on crime, and want to really, lock up the criminals. And if you really want to be tough on crime, you want to focus on the crimes that are having the biggest detriment to our society. Well, the biggest detriment to society is that $50 billion that's being lost. Most of the time, and we're talking about lower wage folks who are being the most victimized. Folks, the most common complaint is about just under $1,000, and just under $1,000, feels insignificant on the page. Obviously, to this lower wage worker, that $1,000 loss is huge. It means maybe not being able to pay your rent, maybe not being able to buy groceries, take care of your family, and the lower wage worker has less resources to take time off, to make these complaints, to go to small claims court, to try to get, because the other thing is that most of the time, even if it takes the several year process to have this adjudicated to find that wage theft did occur, most of the time they don't get their money back. They just don't. Right. And they've lost time and energy and psychological health in trying to go after their employer. So really, this is an issue that we as the legislature should absolutely be championing, because you're just not going to change the behavior by these few brave folks who are the least resourced, making huge sacrifices for what in the end may not be their what's due coming to them.
Yeah, no, I just want to, thank you so much for introducing this amendment. I mean, this is definitely an issue that I think is long overdue. And what are kind of like the next steps to getting this bill across the finish line?
So we had our introductory hearing, which I'm super grateful. Lots of great union representation at that hearing, basically speaking to these issues and also talking about, quite frankly, this issue of not accepting third-party reports, saying that, when union leaders are informed of these violations, sometimes they aren't able to help as much as they would like because of the Department of Labor not accepting the third-party reports. Right. But basically, as far as the bill is concerned, we've had our introductory hearing. We will need to have another hearing to answer committee members' questions and to make sure that everybody understands exactly what the bill is doing, and to therefore move the bill out of committee and onto its next committee of referral. Again, I am sending text to my staff as fast as I can. He can speak to where the bill will go after our committee, and he can give a few more details about the felony conviction that would be accompanied with wage theft if someone's found guilty and what the penalties would be. So
yeah,
hopefully,
for sure. And I just hope people take away from this Labor Live of just how big of an issue wage theft is. I mean, I was blown away listening to your hearing where you were saying basically all other types of thefts don't even add up together to the total value of wage theft in the United States. Right. And that is something I think so many people don't realize because we're just so used to. I mean, I hope people check their pay stubs. That's you should always be kind of keeping track. But you have all these seasonal workers and construction workers. They're working 16 hours a day. They're worried about getting the job done, right? They're not worried about.
Hey, Alex, I'm going to admit full disclosure. I have never, in all the different jobs that I've done since I was 16 years old and was delivering pizza, I've never taken out a calculator and checked my boss's work on my paycheck. And I know that everyone should do that, but I'm just saying I absolutely sympathize with people who haven't. I think if people were taking out calculators and checking every single pay stub they got, they would inevitably find occasional mistakes. And I believe that most of the time those mistakes are going to benefit the employer and not the employee. So I'm definitely just putting it out there that I think there are folks listening right now who think that they've never been a victim of wage theft, and they probably have. It's just you probably haven't looked close enough. Having said that, and sort of saying that, that everybody anywhere could be the victim of wage theft, and you could be a victim of wage theft right now and not know it. The people who are most vulnerable are probably folks who are not watching right now. And that is folks that we bring in to do labor in Alaska who aren't from Alaska, so they don't understand what Alaska's minimum wage laws are.
Right.
But many of them also don't speak English. And I really do think that that is a group of folks who are at an extraordinary disadvantage. The Department of Labor will say that you can call and make complaints even if you don't speak English, that they will provide translator services. But I think the chances of those reports coming from folks who don't speak English are very, very low, because I think those workers just don't know how. I'll just say I did do a small workers' rights podcast episode in May of last year. We translated it into Ukrainian, Tagalog, Spanish. We did 6 languages, Hmong, a couple of other languages, Korean, so that folks could hopefully get the word out. And I do know that those episodes in the foreign languages were downloaded hundreds of times. So I certainly don't think English speakers were downloading the Hmong version of the podcast. So I think we did get the word out a little bit. We attempted to basically spread the word that every worker in Alaska, whether you are from Alaska, whether you are from another country, whether you have legal standing or not, employers in Alaska are required to follow the law for all their workers, regardless of the status of their workers. So even someone who is an undocumented worker, and technically is not a legal worker, they're still entitled to the state minimum wage. They're still entitled to overtime pay. They're still entitled to, for example, in these cases of people being sent out to remote locations, to being returned to their city of origin at no cost. That's part of our labor laws, and those folks are entitled to that, but they never know it. And they're those folks absolutely are being taken advantage of. And I believe that there are too few people really going to bat for those folks. I mean, they're not voters, but I worry about them, and I want to make sure that we look out for them, because again, to get back to those points that were made by former Representative Jesse Sumner, Representative Jesse Sumner, who owns a construction company in Wasilla, was talking about how impossible it is for him to follow all the laws and be an employer that pays his workers fairly when he is competing with a construction company that is not paying his workers fairly. Folks who are employing folks who don't speak English or are undocumented can be paid a drastically lower rate, and those folks do not complain. They do not make complaints to the Department of Labor, and that employer is able to continue, is rewarded by for his wrongdoing, and that is something we need to be paying attention to and putting a stop to.
Absolutely, and I think one of the reasons here at the AFL-CIO why we're so excited about this amendment is when you're in a union, right, you have that collective bargaining agreement. You have a contract that stipulates I am employed by my employer and I'm going to make X, Y, and Z, and this is exactly how it gets played out. And if the employer doesn't follow that agreement, I have a representative. Everyone that's in a union has a representative that can enforce that contract. But unfortunately, workers who don't have the pleasure yet of being in a union don't always have that support. So we're so excited that this is kind of giving workers that aren't in a union one extra level of protection and support to ensure that they're getting fairly compensated and everything that's owed to them.
Right.
So
I think by making it a crime, and this Department of Law was present in our initial hearing, and there were a lot of questions about, would you be calling the police? Would the police go and investigate this crime of wage theft? And ultimately, we have an under-resourced. So I want to just say something. I don't think our Department of Labor is necessarily purposely avoiding investigating and going after employers. They are under-resourced. We don't have enough trained, Department of Labor investigators to be out in the field looking for these problems and investigating them. So I think first and foremost, we need to adequately fund the organization that knows labor laws and knows how to enforce them. But I think just having the discussion of getting real law enforcement involved, I think is important. And I think that there is potential for having criminal investigations led by folks outside the Department of Labor. And I think that's going to be huge. People whose full-time job is to investigate the crime of wage theft, which we know is everywhere.
Absolutely. It acts as like as a deterrence that, you're not just going to get, if you're doing this on such a high level so many times, you're not just going to get, a little email from, or, you're not just going to go through the Department of Labor process, that you could actually be prosecuted. So it kind of sends that chilling effect that you should not be messing with workers' pay in an unlawful way.
Yes.
Which I think is really important.
Hey, Alex, I just want to close with, I'm super grateful that I know that this is an important issue to unions. And I just want to state for the record that, we owe unions for so many great things in our society. 40-hour work week, overtime pay, workplace safety, child labor laws, civil rights, paid sick leave, equal pay, prevailing wage protections, so much more. I want to ask, anyone who's watching right now that you can definitely help to get wage theft made a crime. If you can't show up in the Capitol to provide public testimony, if you could email your own personal experience or just your support for this to the Judiciary Committee. And let me pull up what our email address is. I really, do you know what my email address is?
It should be house.judiciary@akledge.gov. And we'll make sure we put that in the comments.
Put that in your show notes, in the comments, akleg.gov. Yep. Send your personal experience of what's happened with you and wage theft and why it's important that we make this a criminal law in Alaska. I think that would be huge, and it would be something that you guys do. And so it's House Bill 97 is the bill, and it is sponsored by Representative Zach Fields. And the bill as a whole does more than wage theft. I'm going to just tell you quite frankly, the part for me that matters is the wage theft. That is the biggest change that we're going to be making in Alaska, is the wage theft portion of that bill. And so if you send in support that's only talking about wage theft for House Bill 97, that makes perfect sense. And that's what I would love for you guys to do.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure we put that in the comments. And again, Representative Gray, thanks so much for taking time out of your day to join us on the program and kind of share your perspective on what's going on with wage theft in Alaska.
Alex, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for all the work that you do and all the work that all of you guys out there do. We appreciate you, and have a wonderful day.
Awesome. Well, folks, that is it for today's episode of Labor Live at 12:05. Don't forget to tune in next week as we take another deep dive on issues impacting Alaska's working families. So have a great one.